The bright California sun was setting as Dr. Sarah Bennett walked confidently through the parking lot of Los Angeles International Airport's private terminal. Her designer heels clicked against the pavement as she pulled her small carry-on suitcase, her hospital ID badge, and first-class boarding pass securely in her other hand. At 42 years old, she had grown accustomed to being one of the few black female neurosurgeons in the country, but her accomplishments spoke volumes. Sarah had just finished delivering a groundbreaking presentation at a medical conference, where she shared her innovative surgical techniques that had saved countless lives. Her colleagues had given her a standing ovation, and several hospitals had already reached out about potential collaborations. The successful presentation left her feeling energized, despite the long day. As she approached the private terminal entrance, Sarah noticed how quiet and exclusive this section of the airport was. Unlike the main terminals with their crowds and chaos, this area catered to private jet customers and VIP travelers. The glass doors gleamed in the evening light, and a uniformed security guard stood at attention near the entrance. The guard, a middle-aged white man whose name tag read James Miller, watched as Sarah approached. His eyes narrowed slightly, and his posture stiffened. Sarah had seen that look before, the look of someone making assumptions based solely on her appearance. Still, she maintained her professional demeanor, having learned long ago that her achievements were the best response to prejudice. "Good evening," Sarah said pleasantly, extending her boarding pass and ID. "I'm here for the 7:30 private charter to Boston." Miller barely glanced at her documents before his face twisted into a skeptical expression. "Ma'am, this is the private terminal. Are you sure you're in the right place?" His tone was dripping with condescension. Sarah took a deep breath, remembering the countless times she'd faced similar situations throughout her career. "Yes, I'm certain. As you can see from my documentation, I'm Dr. Sarah Bennett, and I have a confirmed reservation." Just then, a white businessman in a suit walked up behind her. Miller immediately smiled and waved him through without checking any documentation. The contrast was stark and unmistakable. Turning back to Sarah, Miller's voice grew more aggressive. "I'm going to need to see additional identification. These credentials could be fake. We have strict protocols here." Sarah noticed other travelers starting to watch the scene unfold. Some looked uncomfortable, while others pretended not to notice. A young flight attendant standing nearby began fidgeting with her phone, clearly disturbed by what she was witnessing. With steady hands, Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out her driver's license, medical license, and hospital privileges card. "Here are 3 additional forms of identification," she said calmly, her voice clear and controlled. "I would also like to speak with your supervisor." Miller's face reddened slightly, but he maintained his hostile stance. "The supervisor is busy. I'm authorized to handle security here, and something doesn't look right about your documentation." Sarah had already pulled out her phone and begun recording the interaction. Years of experience had taught her the importance of documenting such incidents. She noticed a group of pilots watching from nearby, their expressions concerned. "What exactly doesn't look right?" Sarah asked, her voice steady but firm. "Is it the fact that I'm a black woman with credentials to board a private jet? Or is there something specific about my multiple forms of valid identification that concerns you?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Other passengers had stopped to observe, and the young flight attendant had disappeared, presumably to get help. Sarah stood her ground, maintaining eye contact with Miller, who seemed increasingly uncomfortable under her steady gaze. In that moment, Sarah thought about all the young black girls who dreamed of becoming doctors, scientists, or executives. She thought about her own journey and the importance of standing up to discrimination, not with anger, but with dignity and strength. This wasn't just about boarding a plane. It was about challenging the systemic biases that continued to plague society. As she waited for what would happen next, Sarah's phone continued recording, her posture remained professional, and her determination grew stronger. She had faced obstacles like this throughout her career, and each time she had transformed them into opportunities for change. This time would be no different. The tension at the private terminal entrance continued to build as more people gathered around. Sarah's phone kept recording as James Miller shuffled through her documents for the 3rd time, his face growing redder by the minute. The evening sun cast long shadows across the terminal's polished floor, and the air felt thick with unease. Just then, Maria Rodriguez, the terminal supervisor, came hurrying toward them. The young flight attendant who had disappeared earlier followed close behind her. Maria's face showed genuine concern as she approached the scene. "What seems to be the problem here?" Maria asked, her eyes moving between Sarah and Miller. She immediately recognized Dr. Bennett from previous flights and couldn't hide her shocked expression at the situation unfolding before her. Miller straightened his uniform and cleared his throat. "I'm conducting a security check. The documentation seemed suspicious." His voice wavered slightly as he spoke to his supervisor. Maria quickly looked through Sarah's documents and shook her head in disbelief. "These are all perfectly valid, James. Dr. Bennett is a regular passenger through our terminal." She turned to Sarah with an apologetic expression. "I am so sorry for this inconvenience, Dr. Bennett. Please, let me escort you to your flight personally." But Sarah raised her hand gently. The terminal had grown quieter now, with everyone watching to see what would happen next. Even the pilots who had been observing from a distance moved closer, their faces showing support for her. "Actually," Sarah said, her voice clear and controlled, "I would like to address this situation properly." She turned to face Miller directly. "Your actions tonight aren't just about me. They represent a larger problem that affects many professionals like myself daily." Miller shifted uncomfortably, looking like he wanted to disappear. But Sarah continued, her voice remaining calm yet firm. "Would you be willing to have a conversation with me about what just happened here?" The request surprised everyone, especially Miller. He had expected anger, complaints, or demands for his firing. Instead, this accomplished woman was offering to talk with him. The other passengers watched in amazement as Sarah demonstrated a level of grace that few would have shown in such a situation. Maria quickly arranged for them to use a small conference room near the terminal entrance. As Sarah and Miller walked toward the room, she noticed some passengers giving her encouraging nods. The young flight attendant even whispered thank you as she passed by. Inside the conference room, Sarah took a seat across from Miller, who couldn't seem to meet her eyes. The room was quiet except for the distant sound of aircraft taking off. Sarah placed her phone, still recording, on the table between them. "Mr. Miller," she began softly, "I'd like to share something with you. Every day, I perform brain surgeries that save lives. My patients come from all backgrounds, and none of them care about the color of my skin when I'm working to save them or their loved ones." Miller finally looked up, his expression changing from defensive to uncertain. Sarah continued, pulling out her phone and showing him pictures of her medical team, her patients, and the lives she had touched throughout her career. "When you stopped me tonight, you didn't see Dr. Sarah Bennett, the neurosurgeon who just presented a groundbreaking surgical technique at a medical conference. You didn't see the woman who has saved countless lives in the operating room. You saw only the color of my skin and decided I didn't belong here." Miller's face showed the first signs of genuine understanding. His hands, which had been tightly clasped on the table, began to relax. The weight of his actions was finally sinking in. "I'm sharing this with you," Sarah explained, "not to shame you, but because I believe in the power of understanding. Every interaction like this is an opportunity to learn and grow, to challenge our assumptions and become better people." As part two of their story unfolded in that small conference room, neither Sarah nor Miller knew that this conversation would lead to changes far beyond what either of them could imagine. The evening that had started with discrimination was transforming into something unexpectedly powerful. In the small conference room, the atmosphere began to shift as Miller wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Sarah's words had touched something deep inside him, breaking down walls he didn't even know he had built. "I've been working here for 15 years, Miller said quietly, his voice shaky. "Never thought I was, prejudiced. My kids have black friends. I watch basketball. I just..." He trailed off, realizing how hollow these excuses sounded. Sarah leaned forward slightly, her expression remaining gentle but serious. "Having black friends or enjoying black culture doesn't automatically free us from bias," she explained. "What matters is recognizing these biases when they appear and choosing to act differently." As they talked, Maria, the supervisor, knocked softly and entered the room. She carried 3 cups of coffee, her face showing both concern and relief at the calm discussion taking place. "Dr. Bennett, your flight has been delayed by an hour due to weather. Take all the time you need here." After Maria left, Miller looked at the steam rising from his coffee cup. "Can I tell you something?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. My daughter. She wants to be a doctor. She's smart, really smart. But I've always told her to consider nursing instead, said it would be easier. Sarah's eyes showed understanding. And why did you think that would be easier for her? Miller's face flushed with shame as he realized his own limiting beliefs. I guess, I never thought someone like, I didn't think. He struggled to find the right words. You didn't think someone could overcome those barriers, Sarah finished for him. She pulled out her phone again and showed him pictures of her speaking at medical conferences, teaching young residents, and performing complex surgeries. Every person in these pictures faced barriers, but barriers exist to be broken. The conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock. The young flight attendant from earlier peeked in. I'm sorry to interrupt, but several passengers wanted me to give you this. She handed Sarah a stack of business cards and notes. Sarah looked through them, her eyes widening. Among them were cards from a television producer, a diversity training consultant, and several business executives who had witnessed the incident. All of them expressed their support and offered opportunities to share her story. Miller watched as Sarah read the notes. I never meant to cause all this, he said softly. I did what I always do. Never thought about why I was doing it. Sarah placed the cards on the table and looked at Miller thoughtfully. Change doesn't happen in grand gestures, she said. It happens in small moments like this, when we choose to have difficult conversations instead of walking away angry. Outside the conference room, the terminal had returned to its normal busy state, but word of what was happening inside had spread. Passengers delayed by weather gathered in small groups, discussing what they had witnessed. The young flight attendant shared the story with her colleagues, who passed it on to other airport staff. Maria returned to the room once more, this time with papers in her hand. Dr. Bennett, Mr. Miller, I've been on the phone with our corporate office. They would like to turn this incident into a training opportunity for all our staff. Dr. Bennett, they're hoping you might consider being part of that program. Sarah looked at Miller, who now sat straighter in his chair. Would you be willing to share your perspective too? She asked him. Sometimes the most powerful teaching comes from someone who has recognized and changed their own biases. Miller nodded slowly, his face showing determination. Yes, he said firmly. Yes, I would. My daughter, she needs to see that barriers are meant to be broken, and maybe I need to learn that too. As part 3 of their evening drew to a close, the small conference room had become more than just a place for confrontation. It had become a space for transformation, understanding, and the beginning of real change. Neither Sarah nor Miller could have predicted how their evening would unfold, but sometimes the most meaningful changes come from the most unexpected moments. News of what happened in the private terminal spread quickly throughout the airport. By the time Sarah and Miller emerged from the conference room, a small crowd had gathered, including airline executives who had rushed over after hearing about the incident. Among them was Thomas Parker, the airline's chief operating officer, who had been in another terminal when he received the call. He approached Sarah with genuine concern in his eyes. Dr. Bennett, I apologize for coming unannounced, but when I heard what happened, and more importantly, how you handled it, I knew I had to meet you personally. Sarah noticed that Miller stood awkwardly to the side, unsure if he should stay or leave. She gestured for him to join them, surprising both Miller and the executives. Mr. Parker, I believe this situation presents an opportunity, she said confidently. And Mr. Miller here has shown that people can change when given the chance to understand their actions. The young flight attendant who had supported Sarah earlier approached with an iPad. Dr. Bennett, your story is already on social media. Look at these comments. She showed them a post that had gone viral, with thousands of people sharing their own similar experiences and praising Sarah's response. Parker read some of the comments, his expression growing more determined. Dr. Bennett, we'd like to do more than just offer standard sensitivity training. Would you consider helping us develop a comprehensive program? Your approach tonight, choosing education over anger, it's exactly what we need. Sarah looked around at the gathered crowd. She saw pilots, flight attendants, other security guards, and passengers, all waiting to hear her response. But her eyes settled on Miller, who stood straighter now, looking different from the defensive man who had blocked her entrance hours ago. I'll help on one condition, Sarah said, her voice clear and firm. This program needs to include voices from both sides of these encounters. Mr. Miller, she turned to face him directly. Would you be willing to share your perspective on how this evening changed your outlook? Miller's eyes widened in surprise. Instead of being fired or disciplined, he was being offered a chance to be part of the solution. Yes, he said, his voice growing stronger. My daughter deserves to live in a world where she can be whatever she wants to be. Maybe helping with this program is where that starts. The crowd murmured approvingly. Maria, the supervisor, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. Dr. Bennett, your flight to Boston has been canceled due to weather. The airline would like to offer you our executive suite for the night, and we've arranged for a private flight first thing tomorrow morning. As the crowd began to disperse, a teenage girl approached them shyly. She was wearing a hospital volunteer badge and had obviously been waiting for a chance to speak. Dr. Bennett, I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm the only black girl in my science club at school. Sometimes people make me feel like I don't belong there. Seeing how you handled this tonight, it means a lot. Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out one of her business cards. What's your name? Jessica, the girl replied softly. Well, Jessica, I do monthly mentoring sessions at my hospital for young people interested in medicine. Here's my card. Have your parents contact my office. Sarah smiled warmly at the girl's excited expression. As the evening wound down, Parker arranged for a car to take Sarah to the airport hotel. Before leaving, she turned to Miller one last time. Send my contact information to your daughter, she said. Tell her there's a place for her in my mentoring program too, if she's interested. Miller's eyes filled with tears as he nodded. The man who had started the evening as a symbol of discrimination was ending it as a partner in positive change. As Sarah walked toward the waiting car, she heard him say quietly, "Thank you for not giving up on me." The events of that evening would ripple out far beyond the airport terminal, touching lives in ways that none of them could have predicted. Sometimes the greatest changes come not from confrontation, but from the willingness to see the humanity in each other, even in the most challenging moments. The next morning, Sarah sat in her hotel room, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. Her inbox was flooded with emails, and her social media notifications wouldn't stop buzzing. Someone had recorded the entire incident at the terminal, and the video had gone viral overnight. The comments section was filled with thousands of messages. Many shared similar stories of discrimination, while others praised her calm approach to the situation. But one message caught her eye. It was from Miller's daughter, Emily. Dear Dr. Bennett, the message read, "My dad came home last night and told me everything that happened," he cried while telling the story. "I've never seen him cry before. Thank you for showing him a different way to see the world. I'm 16, and I want to be a doctor, but I was afraid to tell him. Last night, he told me he believes in me now. Can I really join your mentoring program?" Sarah wiped away tears as she typed her response, inviting Emily to the next session. As she finished, her phone rang. It was Thomas Parker, the airline's COO. "Dr. Bennett," Parker said excitedly, "I hope I'm not calling too early, but something amazing has happened. After last night's events, we received hundreds of emails from our staff worldwide. They're sharing their own experiences with discrimination and asking to be part of the change. We'd like to start the training program as soon as possible." Sarah smiled, thinking about how one difficult moment had sparked such widespread interest in change. "That's wonderful news, Mr. Parker. When would you like to begin?" "Actually," Parker continued, "we have another surprise for you. Our marketing team would like to create a documentary about last night's events. They want to show how one person's response to discrimination can create positive change. Both you and Mr. Miller would be the main focus." As Sarah packed her bags for her rescheduled flight, she received another message. This one was from Jessica, the teenage girl from the science club. She had shared her encounter with Sarah at the terminal with her science club, and now the whole club wanted to visit Sarah's hospital for a special tour. In the hotel lobby, Maria was waiting to escort Sarah back to the terminal. "Dr. Bennett, you've become quite famous around here," she said with a warm smile. "Every security guard requested to be part of the new training program. Even the cleaning staff and baggage handlers want to participate." When they arrived at the terminal, Sarah was surprised to see Miller already there, in his uniform, standing straighter than before. Next to him stood a teenage girl who could only be Emily, his daughter. They were both waiting to see Sarah off. Emily rushed forward, her eyes shining with admiration. "Dr. Bennett, thank you for answering my message. Dad and I talked all night about medical school and what it takes to become a doctor. He's different now. You changed him. Miller stepped forward, looking more confident than the night before. Dr. Bennett, I spent all night thinking about how to make things right. I volunteered to lead a discussion group for security staff about last night. If we can prevent even one person from experiencing what you did, it will be worth it. Sarah looked at father and daughter standing together, seeing hope and change in their eyes. Sometimes, she said, our hardest moments become our most important teachers. Emily, I look forward to seeing you at the mentoring session next week. As Sarah walked toward her gate, she heard whispers and saw people pointing. But unlike last night, these weren't looks of suspicion or judgment. They were looks of respect and admiration. Her phone buzzed again, another news station wanting to interview her about the incident. The terminal felt different this morning. People of all backgrounds greeted each other with more awareness and kindness. Sarah noticed a security guard helping an elderly Indian woman with her bags, speaking to her with patience and respect. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments, Sarah thought. As she boarded her flight, she knew that what had started as an unpleasant encounter had grown into something much more powerful, a movement for understanding and change that would ripple out far beyond this terminal. 1 month had passed since the incident at the airport. Sarah sat in her office at Boston General Hospital, looking at the calendar filled with new commitments that had emerged from that eventful night. The morning's newspaper lay open on her desk, featuring a full-page article about the changes happening at airports across the country. Her phone buzzed with a text from Miller. Dr. Bennett, you won't believe what happened today. 3 black female pilots came through our terminal. Before your training program, I might have acted differently. Today, I welcome them with respect. Emily was here doing her airport internship and got to meet them. She hasn't stopped smiling since. Sarah smiled, remembering how the airline's training program had grown beyond their expectations. What started as a single airport initiative had spread to 20 major airports nationwide. The video of that night had been viewed millions of times, inspiring other companies to re-examine their own practices. A knock on her office door interrupted her thoughts. It was Jessica, the teenage girl from the science club, now a regular visitor to the hospital. Dr. Bennett, our science club presentation about bias in healthcare won first place at the state competition. She rushed in, holding a shiny trophy. That's wonderful, Jessica. Tell me all about it, Sarah said, clearing space on her desk for the trophy. She had been mentoring Jessica's science club, helping them research how racial bias affects medical treatment outcomes. The judges were amazed. Jessica continued excitedly. 3 other schools asked if we could present at their science fairs. And guess what? Emily Miller joined our club last week. Can you believe her dad used to think girls like us couldn't be doctors? Just then, Sarah's computer chimed with a video call. It was Thomas Parker from the airline, along with Maria Rodriguez. Their faces looked excited as they appeared on screen. Dr. Bennett, Parker began, the numbers are in from the first month of our new training program. Passenger complaints about discrimination have dropped by 70%. Staff satisfaction is up by 45%. But here's the best part. Applications from minority candidates for all positions have doubled. Maria jumped in, and Mr. Miller's discussion group has become so popular that we're starting similar groups at other airports. He's become quite the advocate for change. As they talked, Sarah's assistant brought in a stack of letters. They came from all over the country, young black girls sharing their dreams, airport staff sharing their stories of change, and passengers writing about their own experiences with discrimination and hope. One letter caught her eye. It was from a high school in Los Angeles. Dear Dr. Bennett, your story inspired our entire school. We've started a program called Dignity in Action, where students learn to handle discrimination the way you did, with strength and grace. Would you consider speaking at our school? Sarah checked her calendar again. Between surgeries, the airport training program, her expanded mentoring sessions, and speaking engagements, she was busier than ever. But these opportunities to create change were too important to pass up. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo from Emily Miller. She was wearing a white lab coat at a hospital volunteer orientation. The caption read, "First step toward becoming Dr. Miller. Thank you for showing Dad and me that dreams don't have colors." Later that afternoon, Sarah had a meeting with her hospital's board of directors. They were implementing new policies inspired by her airport experience, ensuring that every patient and medical professional was treated with equal respect, regardless of their background. As she walked through the hospital halls, Sarah noticed something different. More young black girls were participating in the hospital's youth programs. More minority patients were speaking up about their needs. More staff members were standing up against subtle forms of discrimination. The incident that could have been just another painful experience had become a catalyst for real change. Sarah thought about Miller, Emily, Jessica, and all the lives that were transforming because they chose understanding over anger that night at the airport. Her assistant poked her head in one last time. "Dr. Bennett, the documentary crew is here. They want to film the mentoring session with Emily and Jessica's science club. Should I send them in?" The hospital conference room buzzed with excitement as the documentary crew set up their cameras. 20 teenage girls, including Emily, Miller, and Jessica, sat in a semicircle, all wearing white lab coats with their names embroidered on them, a surprise gift from the airline. Sarah stood at the front of the room, beside a familiar face, James Miller. In the 2 months since their airport encounter, he had become a regular speaker at these sessions, sharing his journey from bias to understanding. Today was special because they were filming the final segment of the documentary titled Changed Hearts, the terminal that transformed. Before we start filming, Sarah addressed the group. "I want you all to remember that real change happens in small moments. 2 months ago, Mr. Miller and I could have chosen anger. Instead, we chose understanding." The documentary director signaled for the cameras to roll. The room fell silent as Sarah began teaching the girls about the brain surgery technique that had brought her to Los Angeles that fateful night. Miller watched from the side, his eyes filled with pride as his daughter Emily answered questions about neural pathways. Suddenly, the door opened, and Thomas Parker walked in with Maria Rodriguez. But they weren't alone. Behind them came a group of airline executives from different companies, all carrying folders. "Dr. Bennett," Parker announced, "we hope you don't mind us interrupting, but we have something important to share." He opened his folder and pulled out. 1 year had passed since that life-changing night at the airport. Sarah sat in the grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel, surrounded by hundreds of people who had gathered for the premiere of Changed Hearts, the terminal that transformed. The documentary was finally complete. On the stage sat familiar faces: James Miller and his daughter Emily, now a pre-med freshman in college; Jessica, who had just won a national science competition; Maria Rodriguez, recently promoted to regional director of airport operations; and Thomas Parker, who had made the Bennett Protocol this company's proudest achievement. As the lights dimmed, Sarah watched her own face appear on the giant screen, remembering that moment when she first approached the terminal. The audience fell silent as they watched the scene unfold. The discrimination, the tension, and then the unexpected turn toward understanding. Halfway through the film, Sarah felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. A flight attendant handed her a note. "Dr. Bennett, there are 15 black female pilots in the audience tonight. They'd all got their jobs through the new airline diversity program. They wanted you to know." The documentary showed how one incident had created waves of change. Over the past year, 50 airports had adopted the Bennett Protocol. More than 200 minority students had received scholarships. Miller's training program had reached thousands of airport staff members nationwide. When the lights came up, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The host of the evening, a well-known news anchor, stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a surprise announcement. The governor has declared this day Understanding Over Anger Day in our state, but that's not all." Emily Miller walked to the podium, standing tall in her pre-med college jacket. "Last week, my dad and I visited my old high school to talk about change. The same school where he once told me not to dream too big. Now, 20 girls from my school are joining Dr. Bennett's mentoring program. 5 of them have already received early acceptance to pre-med programs." Miller stood next, his security badge still pinned to his chest, but now it carried a new title: Chief of Diversity Training. "A year ago, I was the problem," he said, his voice strong. "Today, I travel to airports across the country, teaching security staff how to check their biases before they check passengers' IDs. Dr. Bennett didn't just change my mind, she showed me how to change others." Jessica approached the microphone next, holding up her science fair trophy. "Thanks to Dr. Bennett, our science club now has more girls than boys. We don't just study science, we study how to make the world better through understanding. Next month, we're presenting our research on bias in healthcare at a national conference. Thomas Parker shared the latest numbers. Discrimination complaints down by 85% across all participating airports, minority employment up by 60%, and passenger satisfaction at an all-time high. The Bennett Protocol isn't just a training program, he announced. It's becoming a national standard for how businesses handle diversity and discrimination. Finally, Sarah walked to the podium. The audience rose in a standing ovation, but she raised her hand for quiet. 1 year ago, I had two choices, she began. I could let anger win, or I could choose understanding. That choice changed more than just one moment at an airport. It changed countless lives. She pointed to Miller. It changed him from someone who blocked dreams to someone who helps build them. She gestured to Emily. It changed her from someone afraid to follow her dreams to someone leading others toward theirs. She smiled at Jessica, and it showed all of us that the best response to discrimination isn't always fighting back. Sometimes it's reaching out. As the evening ended, a young airport janitor approached Sarah. "Dr. Bennett," he said shyly, "I watched what happened that night. I was cleaning the terminal. Yesterday, my daughter asked me if she could be a doctor like you. Thanks to your story, I knew exactly what to say. Dream bigger, baby girl. Dream bigger." Sarah looked around the ballroom one last time. The documentary would now be shown in schools, businesses, and organizations across the country. But the real story wasn't on the screen. It was in the changed hearts of every person in that room, and in the countless lives they would touch with their new understanding. Sometimes the greatest victories don't come from winning fights, but from transforming them into moments of growth. Sarah's choice that night had proven that when we choose understanding over anger, we don't just change one moment, we change the world, one heart at a time.